quickly, my name is Ben Rhodes. I am the Senior Vice President of Association Management for CAMS. I run our Charlotte operation, one of the 8 regions that we do touch within North and South Carolina. We are happy to have you with us. Steve Black will be giving a good presentation. We had about 250 board members signed up today, so everybody is on mute. We will be conducting Q&A through the bottom of your screen. There is a little Q&A icon that you can click on and ask questions. So we will be moderating that for everyone. If you do have questions, we do encourage you to ask those questions, and we will get those questions over to Steve to answer throughout the session. There are 4 topics we are going to be covering. The first is board meetings. The next will be membership meetings. The third will be budget ratification meetings. And then the last will be hearings, how to conduct hearings in a virtual environment. So there will be also an opportunity for polling. We are going to be polling everybody. So Steve will initiate a couple of polling questions. So we do hope that you can join us with the polling and provide that feedback. Please be on the lookout for future webinars. We are trying to conduct our webinars every 3rd Thursday. We will review the time and see which times work best for everybody. This information will also be made available online. So we are recording the video. You can visit camsmgt.com for recording of this video if you'd like to see it again or share with any of your other board members. There is also a great resource or a great library of information for you to look at for other recordings and other information about being a board member. So we do, again, appreciate your involvement. I will get things going. A quick introduction of Steve, partner with law firm Black, Slaughter & Black. Steve and I have worked together for about 11 years, and so lots of great experience over that time. Provided us a lot of great feedback. They do have association practices throughout North Carolina with Charlotte, Greensboro, the Triangle, and the Wilmington. They are licensed in South Carolina as well, so they do South Carolina work, and we will be talking about North and South Carolina today. Steve heads up the HOA department for the firm and routinely and regularly provides legal advice and litigation for cases and association clients in district and superior court. So in addition to Steve's legal experience, he also serves as the president, vice president, and member at large of the associations that he's lived in. So he's been on the other side. So Steve, with that, I will disappear and be available if you need me. So we'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Ben, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon. As Ben mentioned, we have offices in Greensboro and Charlotte and the Triangle office and one in Wilmington. We enjoy this practice representing homeowners associations and condominium associations. Also, as Ben mentioned, I have sat where you are sitting. I have been on every board of directors of every association that my wife and I have bought a house in since we got married. In fact, before I took the bar exam. That's my first HOA meeting, and from that point forward, I was always sitting on a board of directors at some point. Everything from a single-family home community of 500 homes to a neighborhood that was developer transitioning, which was interesting, a condominium that we had for a while, and a townhome association. So I think I've seen most everything from every angle from that side of the table. So I know what it's like to be where you are sitting. I know the decisions you have to make from the side that you are on, which kind of makes a unique perspective when we're giving our legal advice. I want to thank you all for taking your afternoon to come and listen to this. You know, we are in an unprecedented time with every aspect of our life, but you know, the homeowners association issues that have come up have just been very interesting. As you can imagine, many of you have been going through those. But one of the things that we're kind of now getting into is it's time to have a meeting. A lot of you may have already been having your board meeting because it's been, you know, we've been having these stay-at-home orders now for at least 3 months. And so some of you have already done those kinds of board meetings. I don't know how many of you have tried to do a membership meeting, which is part of what we're going to talk about today. There are certainly some challenges to these. We're used to just having everybody in the same room and conducting the business and being out in, an hour, hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours. But I think times are changing for right now. So what I'm going to give you in exchange for your 40 minutes more of this is I'm going to promise you that when we get through the information I have for you today, that you are going to know more than 80 to 90% of the other board members in the states, North Carolina and South Carolina, that didn't watch this, on how to do your board meetings correctly and how to have your membership meetings done correctly. People are doing the best they can out there for these meetings, but a lot of them are doing it incorrectly. And so you will know more than most people out there. Now, first, just so I can get an idea of who my audience is, I'm going to launch my first poll. And if you all don't mind just taking a second and answering these questions, this kind of gives me an idea of who's with us today, so I can kind of tailor some of my information and comments to you all. Are you a board member, homeowner that's not a board member, community association manager, or other? Do you own or manage a townhome, condominium, single-family home, co-op, or other? Have you been involved in board activities or managing associations for how many years? And I can see the results as they're coming in here, and I can see the one that says for more than 9 years. We have quite a few people that have been involved in this industry or been on the board for more than 9 years. So that's very interesting. That'll help me tailor kind of some of my comments today. But I'm going to give you all another 10 seconds or so to finish up that voting. Then we can get started with some of the substance of what we're going to talk about today. Yeah, very interesting. Okay, we'll just give you some feedback here. We've got about 80% of the people who have already tallied. 88% of the people so far are board members. Okay, so that's very helpful. Another 10% are community managers, and the 1% is an other, whatever that was. Townhomes, 19%, condominiums, 29%, single family homes, 46%. That's good. Other, 6%. Have you been involved in board activities, managed associations for how many years? This is really interesting to me. Less than a year, 14%. Between 1 and 3 years, 36%. Between 4 and 6 years, 21%. Between 6 and 9 years, 11%. And more than 9 years is 18%. So that's very helpful as well. A lot of experience here, which is good. So we can do some kind of high level discussions. All right, so let's get started on the meat of this. Before I get started, of course, as a lawyer, I have to give you a disclaimer. I'm going to give you some general information. I think it probably applies to your association, kind of to the polling thing I saw, but facts could change everything. The governing documents of your association could change everything. Whether or not you're in North Carolina or South Carolina could change everything. So there's a lot of caveats there, but generally speaking, what I'm going to tell you is going to apply. It's just that your situation may tweak it a little bit. So just be careful with the information I give you. I'm giving you enough to be able to ask the right questions of your manager or of your lawyer. So just be careful with that. All right, board meetings. We're going to talk about board meetings and then membership meetings, kind of in that order. So some of you have already done your board meetings, and some of you are going to be doing board meetings after this. Here's what the law likes, okay? The law likes what Robert's Rules of Order says. And what Robert's Rules of Order says is that board of directors should meet together and have conversations to make the best decisions possible. The law encourages that, doesn't necessarily require it, which we'll talk about in a minute, but it strongly encourages that, as does Robert's Rules of Order. Why? Why is that important? I think most of you know this, but there's a theory called synergistic decision-making, okay? Synergistic decision-making. And what that is that is a theory that's been tested for years now, that the more people that are involved in a decision, the better the decision is. You've heard, 2 brains are better than 1, 3 brains are better than 2. That kind of concept is actually provable and has been proven. I've seen the studies that say if Steve makes a decision, if Steve Black makes a decision, hopefully it's a good one. But if Steve and Pamela get together, talk about it, pros and cons, brainstorm things, that decision, just adding one person to it, can increase the value and correctness of the decision by up to 20%. Okay? So then if you add a third person to brainstorm and discuss things. It adds more value and more correctness to the decision. Now there's a point of diminished returns. You know, if you get more than 6 or 7 or 9 people, then as we all know, it actually starts getting harder to make a decision. But the point being, I think the law and Robert's Rules of Order are right, that if a board can get together and talk about things, then you will make much better decisions. So let's start there. So when possible, get together. Why are we talking today is because you probably can't get together. So what are the options? What do we do now? I'm gonna take another second here if you don't mind and run another quick poll. Okay, for board of directors, how often does your board of directors meet? Not during a pandemic. Okay, pretend like the pandemic isn't happening. I'm sorry, let me launch that. All right, so for board members, how often does your board of directors meet? Not during a pandemic. That's the first question. Second question, for board members, when there is not a pandemic, do you meet in someone's home? Do you meet in a school, library, church, or clubhouse, or do you meet electronically? Are there groups that were meeting electronically before this all happened? That's really what I'm interested in. Before the pandemic. What has been the longest board of directors meeting you have experienced? And this one is just really for my morbid curiosity. The longest board member or board meeting you have had to sit in, and kind of how you schedule your meetings. Do you have a set schedule for the meeting? Do you pick one? You pick the next meeting date at the meeting you're at, schedule when needed. So take a minute and respond to those, and then I'll kind of share what I'm seeing here. And really the purpose of this poll is to figure out, okay, we used to be able to do this easily. Meet at somebody's house once a quarter in a certain way. And now all of that has to change for a little while. So I'm trying to get a feel for what really has to change. How much of an impact are these changes going to require everybody? All right, let me kind of go through the results as they are right now. Number one, for board members, how often does your board of directors meet? Not during a pandemic. More than once a month is only 8%. That's probably a good thing. Once a month, 41%. Every other month is 9%. Every quarter, 37%. And then less than once a quarter is 4%. So that's about what I expected. So really, once a month and once a quarter are the most common answers there. And that becomes really important here as we move forward. For board members, when there is not a pandemic, do you meet in a person's home? 27%. At a school, library, church, or clubhouse, 64%. That's a little surprising to me, which is helpful. 9% is electronically. So if we're answering this right, yeah, so maybe 9% of our boards already met electronically. So that's very interesting. What has been the longest board of directors meetings you've experienced? This was just for my morbid curiosity. 1 hour is the longest, 8%. 2 hours, 43%. 3 hours, 35%. And 13% of our audience today has been in a, oh, it just went to 14%. 14% of the audience today has been in a board meeting that was more than 4 hours long. So I've been there, I've sat through at least one of those. Last one, do your boards have a set meeting schedule? First Monday of every month, etc. 55%. Okay, so 55% set their annual calendar probably at the very beginning. 21% picks your next meeting date at the end of each month. I'm sorry, at the end of each one. At the end of each meeting, you just set the next meeting, so that's 21%. And then 23% of you schedule a meeting when needed. Okay, that's helpful. Good, thank you. All right. So, a lot of people were meeting. A lot of people were meeting in venues, churches, libraries, places we can't go right now in large groups. So what do we do now that we can't have board meetings? There are really two options, okay? And if you're taking notes, these are two important options for you to write down. One, You call a board meeting, okay? And let's do it this way. This is more helpful. If you weren't in a pandemic, okay, and the reason I'm doing this is because you'll see how different it is or how non-different it is now that we've got this. When there's not a pandemic, how can the board meet? Number one, you call a duly called board meeting. You know, maybe there's 2 days notice, 3 days notice, whatever. And if a quorum of the board shows up, then you have your board meeting, okay? If you have a board of 5, if 3 people show up, you can have your board meeting. But what about those 2 people that didn't show up? Doesn't matter. You've got quorum, you go along and do your meeting. So all the business you do at that duly called meeting with quorum is okay. It's authorized. What if you can't get together that quickly, or you don't want to get together? Let's say it's one little item that you need to vote on. Let's say it's time for the landscaping contract to be renewed. And it needs to be renewed, you know, this week or next week, and your board meeting's not for a month. What do? Well, you could call a board meeting, you know, in 3 days notice, everybody get together, get a quorum, you could vote on that one item, or you can vote by unanimous consent electronically. So all 5 board members send an email in and says, yes, let's approve that landscaping contract. That's fine. Done. Okay. Here's the trick. And here's where my clients mess this up all the time. And innocently, but they mess it up. You have to have all 5 board members, or if you have 7 board members, it has to be unanimous. 9 board members. All of them have to email in. Number one, have to send an email or consent some way. If you are missing one, let's say you have a board of 5 and only 4 people respond to that email. All 4 say, yeah, renew the contract. That's not good enough. It has to be unanimous consent unless you're at a duly called meeting. A lot of board of directors believe that in between board meetings, you can just put it out there. All in favor of renewing this landscape contract, please email me back. You get 3 yeses, a majority. Okay, it passes. That's not legally correct. Okay, you have to get a response from all board members, all 5 board members in our scenario. Now, what if Bob, you know Bob's on your board of directors, and Bob's kind of hard to get along with, doesn't really respond to things, doesn't participate that much. Bob doesn't respond. Bob doesn't respond to anything. So when you're trying to get this landscape contract renewed in between your board meetings, Bob just doesn't respond at all. Well, you don't have unanimous consent. So you can't authorize the renewal of that contract. If Bob emails in and says, no, I disagree, I do not think we should do it, then you don't have unanimous consent. So you're kind of seeing the difficulty of this. And I get it. It's not a popular opinion that we have to give our clients. It's hard. But what's the answer? What if Bob votes no by email? Or what if Bob doesn't respond by email? You just call a board meeting, 2 to 3 days notice. Bob shows up, Bob doesn't show up. It doesn't matter because you have a duly called board meeting where you only need a majority of the board members there to vote to approve the action, the landscaping contract. So it can be a 2-minute meeting. Call it to order. We have 3 board members here present. All in favor? Aye, done. So that's how you get around Bob if he's not responsive or he doesn't respond. Now, why did I take so much time talking about things you can do when you're not in a pandemic? Is because it's not that much different during a pandemic, okay, except for the physical distance between everybody when you're doing things. What I mean by that is you can still do all business of the board of directors, all business of the board of directors by unanimous consent by email, okay? You just have a lot more business. You know, it might have been the landscaping deal we talked about a minute ago, or maybe it's all business. Here's the business of the association. Please respond yes. You affirmatively agree with all of these items of business. You get all 5 board members to unanimously consent and say yes. Then that is effective during the pandemic. Well, anytime, but that is what some boards are using during the pandemic to get their business done. It's just unanimous consent. Okay. Now, What about if it's more complicated than that? What about, remember I mentioned that synergistic decision-making, you know, we want to talk about the landscaping contract. We want to talk about the other bids we may have gotten. We want to talk about, you know, pieces of the landscaping contract that we don't like and we don't want to renew. That's hard to do by unanimous consent email, right? You want to have a discussion. So what do we do then? There are statutes in North Carolina and South Carolina that help out tremendously with this problem, because it specifically allows us to have electronic meetings of the board of directors. And the reason I'm emphasizing that is because you'll see in a minute, that's very different with the membership meeting. Okay, we don't have that much help on that side, but I've got some ideas for you there too. You can call a duly called board meeting, just like I mentioned before, 2 or 3 days notice, and you can do it by Zoom, you can do it by Skype, you can even do it by telephone conference if you want, okay? Here's the key. What the law is going to require is that everybody on the phone, everybody on Zoom, everybody on Skype, they can hear what's going on and they can interact. They can ask questions, they can have discussions, that's the key, okay? Is that everybody can hear each other and give their opinions, okay? So that's not hard. You know, getting past all the Zoom technology and all that, they've made it fairly simple, although every time, you know, you log on, it seems like something has changed, but they've got it pretty good to where you can conduct your business, and many of you have probably already done that using Zoom. So, question has come in here through the chat. Good question. What if a homeowner wants to participate in the board meeting? Okay. In North Carolina, there is a statute that says that members of the association are supposed to be given reasonable frequency invitations, or invitations with reasonable frequency to the board of directors meetings. Okay. Now, they don't tell us how often we have to invite the membership. They don't tell us how to invite them, but, and I'm just throwing out a number here, it could be very different based on your bylaws, but you know, if you have 10 meetings a year, I would say at least 2 or 3 of them need to be open and inviting any members that want to come. My advice usually is, if a member wants to come to your meeting, let them come. You know, we're not hiding anything, but as we all know, all those board members out there, I saw from the poll, you know, the people who want to come to the meeting are usually the ones that want to hijack the meeting and or make things difficult for us. So I get that, but still our advice is let them come, you know, try not to keep them out too long. So what do we do about that during a pandemic? Number one, they're not going to be involved in the email decisions, you know, the decisions in between board meetings. You don't have to let them in on those emails. You know, when we have to get unanimous consent to renew the landscaping contract, they don't have to be involved in that. Do they need to be invited to and allowed to participate in the Zoom board meeting or the telephone conference board meeting? In North Carolina, as I mentioned, there's a statute that says that we have to give members access or invitations or let them know about the board meetings with reasonable frequency. So I would argue that the 1 or 2 meetings you have to have during a pandemic, that we probably get a pass on that. Meaning we probably don't have to go to great extents to invite or let people know that our board meetings are open during the 1 or 2 meetings we have during this. Now, if it goes on, if it continues on for another 2 months or 4 months, then yes, we're probably going to have to figure out a way to let these homeowners be invited to our Zoom meeting or our telephone conference. That would probably include a mailing that has to go out. It says, this is going to be an open meeting. Here's the Zoom instructions. Here's the time. And you know, the board should probably practice or get with a manager that knows how to do this, knows how to mute people in the background or mute certain people so that you can keep some control of the meeting. But yes, at some point, you're going to have to let the membership join the board of directors Zoom or telephone conference. I just don't think you'd have to do it now. It just hasn't been long enough to require that. All right, I had another question here. Let me see. Okay, if the bylaws specifically say votes by email are okay, are we still held to a 100% consensus rule? Okay, so the question is, I mentioned that board members, if they want to vote between meetings by email, fine, but it has to be unanimous, consent, 100%. And the question, if the bylaws specifically say votes by email are okay, are we still held to a 100% requirement? I'd have to look at that. If it depends on what the wording is, but if the wording is very clear that we allow electronic voting by email as if you were in a board meeting, or and a majority of the emails controlled, or something that makes it really clear that you can do it, possibly, yes. And then the next question is a WhatsApp acceptable since we can talk to each other using that app? Yes, I think the spirit of the law is that you got to be able to hear each other and communicate and brainstorm. 2 brains are better than 1, 3 brains are better than 2. As long as you're able to do that, it should be fine. The law does not dictate what software you have to use or app you have to use. All right, good. Membership meetings. Okay, so that was board meetings. Membership meetings are trickier. Okay, membership meetings are much trickier. Why? Because neither North Carolina or South Carolina has a statute that helps us with it. Okay, North Carolina and South Carolina both have a statute that tells us exactly our authority with board of director meetings. That's why I could go through that so clearly. Membership meetings are harder. Why? I think it's because, I'm very confident, it's because of the synergistic decision-making we've talked about. The law likes people to be able to talk to each other, to converse, to brainstorm, even at a membership level. So they want that to still happen to the extent that it can, but it's impractical. You can't have, I've tried, you can't have more than about 15 or 20 people on a telephone conference or a Zoom or a WhatsApp without it being almost unworkable. So it's just there's a practical problem to it. So that's number one. That's kind of reason number one why I don't think we can treat it the same as board member meetings. 2, there's a due process problem. And what I mean by that is, every member of your association has the right to come to the meeting, to vote, unless they've been suspended for some reason. And so to put a technology option, WhatsApp, Zoom, to say, here's how we're having our meeting membership, come to our meeting. And they may not have a computer. They may not have internet. They may not know how to work the Zoom or the computer or the internet. So there's a lot of kind of due process hurdles of, okay, you had a meeting, but there was no way I could get there, or I couldn't get there to vote or to express my opinion. So I think that's why it's a lot harder, and using technology is not as easy on that with the membership meetings. Now, here's the key. Okay, again, if you're writing stuff down, this is one of the things you need to write down. For a membership meeting to take place during this pandemic, it is my opinion, and I think it's the opinion of most of the HOA lawyers in North Carolina and South Carolina, that using a mail ballot approach is the best approach. Okay, a mail ballot, a U.S. Postal Service ballot, mail ballot. What is that? Okay, a mail ballot is something that's mailed out from the association. It has on it the business of the association. Okay, maybe it's the election. It has the names of the people who have expressed interest, maybe a couple of blank lines for write-in votes. Maybe if you're voting on a specific issue, maybe to annex in additional property or to amend the declaration or whatever, that might be on your ballot, a yes or no to that. So the ballot would need to have on it what's being voted upon. It can be returned by the membership, so you mail it out. It can be returned by the membership either by mail, or they can scan it in and email it to an email address that we give them. Very, very important. On a mail ballot, you need to have a deadline. Okay, please return this ballot by July 17, 2020, August 5th, 2020. It doesn't matter. It shouldn't be really far out, but it really doesn't matter. That's a key piece, is it needs to have a deadline on it. That's a key problem with these when they don't have a deadline on it. So you would send out the mail ballot to the membership. They would fill it out, mail it in, and sometime after that deadline passes, someone, probably the manager or the president or the board together, would open up those ballots and say, okay, these three people won the election and the annexation or the amendment passed or failed. Okay, so that's the way mail ballots work. Now, Steve, doesn't that go against what you just said the law likes, which is everybody getting together, being able to talk, listen to each other, comment, ask questions? Or doesn't that go against all of that the law prefers and that Robert's Rules of Order prefers? Yes, it does. That's why most associations that are doing this will also have a meeting by Zoom or telephone conference or some way, but there's no voting that takes place during those meetings. Okay, now let me draw that out for you. Let's say that we have 3 people to be elected and we have an amendment we're trying to pass, okay, that needs to be passed at a meeting. That's the business of the association for the annual meeting, okay, or the special meeting. We would mail out a notice that says there's going to be an electronic virtual meeting on this date, time, and location, and here's how you log in. Now, do you still have the problem with people without computers and people without software? You do, but again, we're in unprecedented times and we're doing the best that we can, and I'm very comfortable with that. We mail out that meeting notice, and we can mail out the mail ballot, okay, with the names of the nominees to be elected and the business of the amendment. We can mail all of that out before, okay, the meeting and say, please send this back before the scheduled meeting, the scheduled Zoom meeting. So that at the meeting, when the Zoom thing launches and it's Tuesday night at 7 and where everybody logs on, we can say, hello, everybody, here's what the association's been up to. Here's our budget for next year. Here is all the things we've accomplished in the last year. You know, you just basically give the same information that you would give at any regular annual meeting. Okay, you just do it by Zoom. Now, you're muting everybody, okay, because you're basically just presenting to them. And then if you decided to mail out the mail ballots early, you've got them all back before the meeting and the deadline was before the meeting, you can open them and say, congratulations to Sarah, Pamela, and Sue. You guys are our new board members, and the amendment fails. We've already got all the ballots back. Didn't work. The amendment didn't pass. You can do it that way. That's option number 1. Option number 2 is you can send the ballot out, mail the ballot out, but make the deadline shortly after the Zoom meeting. So the people watching the Zoom presentation of the annual meeting can listen to, and maybe Sarah and Pamela, they actually talk on the Zoom. You know, they're the ones that are running for the board. Maybe you give them an opportunity to speak on the thing, and maybe people are unmuted to ask questions. The reason I'm not a big fan of that is because, as I mentioned, if you have more than 15 people or so, it gets a little difficult. But it's possible. You just hold that meeting the same way. Sarah, Pamela, and the other one can be candidates. You can take nominations from the floor during the Zoom meeting. Because remember, at home, I'm one of the board members watching the Zoom, and I have my ballot in front of me because you mailed it to me. I have it right here. I can vote for who I want to. I can maybe write in the candidate. I can vote for or against the amendment. And then I send it in before the deadline, which is a few days after the Zoom meeting, okay, maybe a week after the Zoom meeting. So that's option number 2. Okay, now just to refresh, option number 1 was send the ballot out very early, try to get them all back for a deadline before the meeting, and then announce the results. I'm not a big fan of that one for obvious reasons. They didn't even get to hear from the candidates. They didn't even get to hear about the amendment. Option 2 is better. They have the ballot in their hands. They get to hear everything. Maybe they get to ask some questions. They can chat some questions. Then they can make a more educated decision on their vote and send it in. And then we'll announce, the winners by email or mail at some point later. Option 3 is you don't send the mail ballot out before the Zoom meeting, but you notice the meeting, you have the meeting, you introduce all the candidates, you take nominations from the floor, you talk about whatever you want to talk about. Then the board knows pretty much everything the membership wanted to talk about. The hot issues, the topics, got to answer questions. So maybe you change your ballot a little bit. It just gives us a different opportunity to draft the ballot after the Zoom meeting. Then you mail out the ballot. People get it. They came to the Zoom meeting, a week ago. They come in, they say, oh yeah, I wanted to vote for Sarah and Pamela, and and then they can send it in, and you'll have a deadline that's a couple of weeks after that. And then you'll get the results after that. So those are the three ways that we have seen it be most effective to have an annual meeting or a special meeting. Now, key point. You have to get enough ballots back, okay? Whether it's deadline before the meeting, right after the meeting, or sometime after the meeting. After that deadline, you have to have gotten enough ballots back to have had quorum at a meeting, okay? So if you've got 100 units and your quorum is 10%, then you absolutely have to have 10 ballots back by the deadline in order for the mail ballot to have been your annual meeting, okay? And let me just clarify one point, because I had this question the other day. The actual meeting that you're having, the annual meeting or the special meeting of the membership, is actually the mail part of it. When you're mailing the ballot out, you get the ballot back and you count the ballots. That's the meeting. It's kind of strange. I agree with you. It's not the Zoom meeting. It's not the teleconference, okay? That is not necessary. I encourage you to do it because that's how you get your information out and people want to feel educated and informed. But the actual counting of the ballots and having enough to meet quorum and getting the results from that for your election and your consent, your amendment, that's the meeting itself, okay? In North Carolina and South Carolina is fine. Now, got a couple of questions coming in. That's good. Let's see. Can a membership vote during an online meeting? Can a membership vote during an online meeting? Okay, and I understand this question. What it is, well, look, we're a small townhome community of 14. Why can't we just get on Zoom, have our annual meeting like we normally would, and when people, it's time to vote, they just raise their hand? Why not? Okay. That's because that goes back to the concerns I had earlier about the due process problem. Okay, maybe you had 14 people in your association, but only 13 of them could join because the 14th one didn't have a computer, had technical problems that night, their internet went out, whatever the reason. That just creates problems and challenges to your annual meeting. Okay, that's why we don't like the let me vote just on the screen there. Let me take another question here. Does the communication to homeowners have to be through the mail, or can email suffice? So in other words, we want to send a meeting notice during a pandemic. Can we just email it? The answer is going to be no, unless your governing documents allow it. And very few governing documents allow just strict email notification. We're just not there yet. The law will get there eventually. But right now the law is very clear that you have to mail out, U.S. Postal Service, mail out notices of meetings, okay, in North Carolina and South Carolina. I would be the first one to help you go to the legislature in both states and try to change that. I think they'll get there in 7 or 8 years, but not yet. All right. Let me just peruse here. All right, my HOA has 600 members. You say meetings by more than 15 or so are difficult to manage. What does the board do in such a case? This is a good question to kind of reiterate what I was mentioning earlier. When you have 600 people, great example. You send out the meeting notice. This is the way I like to do it. If I was advising and all your governing documents and your statutes lined up for your annual meeting of a neighborhood this size, or more than 100 units, let's say, I would say, let's do this. Let's have the meeting. Let's send out the ballot. Okay, let's prepare the ballot, send out the ballot to everybody along with the meeting notice that says we're having it on Zoom. It's the night of the ballot would have a deadline to return maybe a week after the meeting, Zoom meeting. So people will have the ballots in their hands that night. We'd have the Zoom meeting, 300 people show up on Zoom. Everybody's muted. When you get to that kind of size, you're going to have to start putting some rules together for the meeting. And here's what I mean by that. Probably in the meeting notice, I would put in, please send us your questions before the meeting. Or we're going to allow chats to ask questions. But you're going to have a moderator in there, kind of like we do today. There is someone sitting behind the scenes, kind of getting all the questions because we got a lot of questions that are very similar. So someone to filter those that day during the meeting so that you can open up the chat like I have here, answer questions, and make comments to it. If someone wants to be heard, you're going to have to come up with a procedure for that. You know, maybe they send a chat and you put them in a line and you unmute one person at a time. I mean, it really is going to be difficult, not impossible, but difficult to do. When you say members may participate, does this mean they must attend? Or if they attend, must they be able to speak? Okay, what this question is this goes back to the board of directors discussion. If a homeowner wants to come to the meeting, do you have to let them come? We've covered that, okay? With reasonable frequency in North Carolina, there's a statute that says, yes, you have to let them come with reasonable frequency. In South Carolina, I'd tell you the same thing. You know, we don't want to appear secretive, so let them come. Do you have to let them speak? The statute in North Carolina just says they have to have notice of it and an opportunity to attend. Just show up. So do you have to let them speak? Probably not, arguably not. However, why would you do that? You know, now I know the pain in the butt. I know they come every meeting and they take up hours of time. I get that. But, you know, to say you can sit there but you can't speak, that's going to get you on the news. So let's be careful with that. All right, let me keep going down here. And I got a lot of great questions coming in, but I want to make sure I get through the information I got for you here. All right, so where are we? We are at the membership meeting. We've talked about the three options: mailing the ballot early, mailing the ballot so they have it, mailing the ballot after the meeting when you have all the information. Somebody asked me this earlier this week, why don't we just use proxies? You know, why this mail ballot thing? Let's just use proxies because people know proxies. They're familiar with proxies. We know how to use them. With a proxy, you actually have to have a meeting, okay? Proxies have to be handed in at some meeting, okay? That's the real difference. Mail ballots, they just come in before the deadline. Somebody opens them up. It doesn't even have to be a board member. I could open them up and tallies them, and that's the meeting right there. It happened. With a proxy, you actually have to schedule a meeting, have a date, time, and location for the meeting. But theoretically, yes, you could have 150 proxies come in to the date, time, and location of the scheduled meeting, at which time they do the same thing. They look at each proxy, hey, Sarah, Pamela vote, Pamela, you know, and so you can kind of get to the same place. The problem is you've got to have a meeting, date, time, and location. Could you schedule it at Billy's house, but tell everybody not to come? You could. People are going to show up. Okay, people are going to show up. So that's why we really encourage people to use the mail ballots. Got another question here. Can you email for a general meeting when no votes are needed? Okay, I mentioned earlier, we are not yet allowed to send membership meeting notices of the date, time, and location just by email. Okay, unless your governing documents say you can, which they probably don't. Can we do it for just an informational meeting? Look, we're not voting. This isn't our annual meeting. It's not even a special meeting. It's just an informational meeting. We're going to talk about the road widening project that's coming through next year. Can you do that only by email? I would hesitate to do that. The point of a meeting of the membership is to give everybody notice so that everybody has an opportunity to come and everybody has an opportunity to show up and speak. And so if you know you don't have everybody's email address, or you know you have some that are old and wrong and are bouncing back, then you're probably not giving good notice of the meeting. So I just don't think we're there yet. All right. Key points. Again, you can't take a vote at the Zoom meeting. Okay, there is none of this. I vote yes on the amendment, or I vote for Pamela. And then remember, it's by mail ballot. Now, I've had this question a couple of times already. It's pretty interesting. North Carolina, can we have a meeting? Can we just get together? Can the membership give notice and have a meeting? Yes, with some really tight restrictions. In North Carolina, you can't have more than 25 people outside, okay? So we have a big soccer field in our neighborhood. Can we call a meeting and have people bring chairs, get ourselves a microphone, and have our annual meeting outside? Yes, so long as more than 25 people don't show up. Now remember, that's husband and wife, so presuming there's 2 owners per house, that's only 12 houses. Presuming all the board members are going to be there, that's another, what, 10 people, right? So chances are the math just doesn't work to let you do that. Plus, everybody has to be 6 feet apart outside. So there's some other rules you have to do. But legally, yes, if you have a neighborhood of 5 homes, maybe you can do it outside. That's in North Carolina. In North Carolina, also, if you want to try to do it inside, the maximum is 10%. That is 10. Okay, 10 people, 6 feet apart. I'm not sure that's even doable for an association, because what are you going to do when you get your 25 people to show up? When the 26th person shows up, you're going to send them away? Or if the 10 people inside and the 11th person shows up, you're going to send them away? I think that has some real due process problems. Hey, I tried to go to my annual meeting and they wouldn't let me in. And I had a lot to say about that amendment that is so crazy that they're trying to pass. So I think you get the point. Interestingly, in South Carolina, that governor's order is a little bit more lax in that there is no cap. They have strongly discouraged groups of more than 100 getting together. So could you do it in South Carolina? Probably. You still have to follow social distancing, and there's some other requirements to do that. But you could probably do it easier in South Carolina than you can in North Carolina. But on my little outline here, I'm asking why? Why do that? Truly. Hopefully we will, I know the North Carolina order expires on June 26th, okay, very soon. Now, who knows what's going to happen to it after that? It may be extended exactly like it is. We may go to phase 3, or we may go back to phase 1 with the way things are going, which tightens the restrictions even more. So we just don't know. It's all uncertain, and with the number of cases rising, why have a meeting in person of the membership if you don't have to? At least I would say wait until after June 26th and see what the governor does in North Carolina. Let me see. I've got another. I'm going to move on to budget ratifications. I'm running out of time here, but let me see what I've got here for. What questions do we have? Okay, it looks like I've covered a lot of this stuff. Good. All right, next topic is budget ratification. In North Carolina, obviously, we have a statute that says you have to get a budget ratified by the membership if your association is within certain age ranges, how long it's been around. So budget ratifications, you can do them. I highly recommend you do them the same way we've been doing this, okay? Mail ballots. Mail ballot is the key to budget ratification. This is really confusing, and I think the legislature in North Carolina did this right, but it's confusing. Here's what the law is. You have to have a budget ratification for most associations, okay, in North Carolina that are relatively new. If less than a certain percentage of the membership shoots it down, then it passes, okay? So it's not as if you have to vote in favor of the budget, okay? That's what a lot of people think. No, the law is unless a certain percentage shoots it down, then it's good, then it's valid. So that makes this real easy. You can send out a notice of a meeting for a budget ratification. Nobody's going to show up. That's all you're doing. You might even be able to do that by Zoom. Do a budget ratification by Zoom, unless the requisite number of people show up to vote it down. Okay, so let's say only 2 people show up. Well, that's not enough people to shoot it down, so meeting's over. Okay, 10 people show up, not enough people. Meeting's over. You don't even have to talk about it. If enough people show up to talk about voting it down, then you need to call your lawyer and talk about that. If your budget is that unpopular, you should know about it and be ready for the lawyer to do it. All right, last topic, and then I'll take some more questions here. The fine hearings. Okay, what do we do about fine hearings? That's where your homeowner is in violation of the restrictive covenants. You have to have a fine before you can fine them. I'm sorry, you have to have a hearing before you can fine them or suspend their privileges and services, like using the pool or something. You still have to give them a meeting or a hearing, okay? But there are some recent changes in the law that make us more comfortable now doing that by Zoom. And the timing is perfect. But doing it by Zoom or maybe even a telephone conference. So you could send out the hearing notice. Mr. Smith, we think you're in violation of the restrictive covenants because you built an above ground pool. You didn't apply for an above ground pool. We have a hearing scheduled for you on July 17th at 7 o'clock. Please join us on Zoom on these places. I'm sorry, here's the instructions to log in, or a telephone conference, or however you want to do it. as long as we, meaning the board of directors or the panel that's appointed as the board of directors for the hearing, as long as we show up, that's a good hearing. The homeowner shows up, you have a discussion, you talk about it just like you would do if you were doing it at the church or the library or in somebody's house. So you can do fine violation hearings by Zoom. I'm very comfortable with that. It's a little bit more uncomfortable doing it by telephone conference, and here's why. In Zoom, two things. One, you can kind of read the other side, and I know that sounds a little hokey, I guess, but it's significant if you've ever tried to do a hearing by phone conference. It's important that the neighbors see each other. It's important that you see the expressions on their face, that you see kind of how they feel about the problem. And second, if there's pictures or documents, okay? And if there's a violation, if there's an above ground pool, we better be able to show a picture of it as a violation. So, being able to share evidence in a hearing through Zoom, I think is pretty important. I think that's necessary. All right. That's what I have on my outline here. I have one more thing I want to mention to you. And this goes pandemic, not pandemic, board meetings, membership meetings, fine hearings, budget ratification, anything, everything in the HOA world, in the condo world. North Carolina, South Carolina, doesn't matter. I came up with this a couple of years ago, well, 15 years ago now, and it has served me well. And I want to share it with you. If you're writing stuff down, this is number 3 that you write down. I call it my 6 o'clock rule. Okay, 6 o'clock like a time rule. The 6 o'clock rule is if the board of directors is about to do something that is going to get us on the 6 o'clock news, then you rethink it. You rethink it, you talk to your manager about it, you talk to your lawyer about it, you talk to people about it. Maybe you still do it, okay? But at least you know the significance of it, and we can tell that we went through this synergistic decision-making thing. We got ideas, brainstormed, got other people's input before we did something that could put us on the 6 o'clock news. I have been on the 6 o'clock news for multiple clients over the years, and that's really where that idea was born. So please take that with you on all your issues as you move forward, and maybe in life. Okay, question came in. What about a budget ratification in South Carolina? You mentioned North Carolina. Great question. The budget ratification is statutory in North Carolina, meaning there's a statute that requires certain associations to do budget ratification meetings. Okay, South Carolina does not have that statute, but a lot of governing documents in South Carolina do. Okay, so you want to be careful with that. Just check your documents in South Carolina to see if you have to have a budget ratification meeting. Let me see if I've got another minute or two here. So we must call at least a Zoom meeting for budget ratification. It cannot be done by mail. Great question. That's good. You could do it by mail. And the reason I say that is because the mail ballot, as I mentioned earlier, the mail ballot serves as the meeting. Okay, so if you have to have a budget ratification meeting, maybe you send out the budget ratification notice, and if, or you could, I guess, what would that ballot look like? Because the ballot would have to say, do you approve or deny the budget? Which is not really the way it works. Because if you remember, it's probably, unless a certain number of people turn it down, that'll still work. Sorry, I was going through the analysis in my head there. Yes, mail ballot, do you approve the budget? Yes or no? Here's the beauty of it. The ballots come in. You get some yeses, you get some nos, but unless you have a certain number of nos, remember it has to be turned down. Unless you get a certain number of no's, then it passes. So yes, it can be done. And you're right, I wasn't clear on that a little bit earlier. You do not have to have a Zoom meeting. You can do the budget ratification by mail. Oh, good question here. Can the membership, even after the pandemic, can we have hearings via Zoom? Can we not meet at the library anymore and do this? Can we just do it by Zoom? I am getting more and more comfortable with saying yes to that. Okay, the technology is there. You can hear and see and interact with each other. There's very little difference, I believe, in kind of the due process concerns of a hearing. And just for fun, the reason you have to have a hearing before you can find people is actually grounded in the Constitution of the United States and of North Carolina and South Carolina, in that You can't take people's life, liberty, or property without due process. And due process just means a hearing. When you're trying to find someone, what are you trying to take away? You're trying to take away some of their property, some of their money. So that's why it's so important to have hearings, because that is their due process under the Constitution. So my point being, do I think that a Zoom hearing, a Zoom fine violation hearing complies with the due process concerns? Yes, I think that is probably the future finding. All right. Can the membership vote via a survey? Can the membership vote via a survey sent to the homeowners? No. And the reason is because the statutes that we're using to vote, North Carolina and South Carolina, say that it has to have a up or down, yes or no answer on it, and it has to be in by a certain deadline. I think what you mean is like a survey software. You know, can we use SurveyMonkey to do this kind of thing? No, I wouldn't feel comfortable with that, and here's why. The statute is really clear. It either has to be mailed in or the ballot must come back, and it can come back by email. Okay, as long as it looks authentic, you know, it's from an authentic email address. I mean, there's a lot of discussion about authenticity, and are people going to try to slide in ballots that are fake? So a survey, I'm not real comfortable with. All right, I only have a few minutes left, but I want to do something fun here. I am going to give you all a pop quiz. Yes, pop quiz. Now, remember from the very beginning, these are all general answers, but the questions are for those general answers. All right, so let's see who passes and fails my pop quiz. All right, the poll should be coming to you now. All right, the first question. If a majority of the board approves board action by email between duly called board meetings, that action is authorized or not authorized? That's the one I was telling you my clients get wrong a lot. 2, if a majority of the board members approve an action during a duly called board meeting, that action is authorized or not authorized. 3rd, mail ballots used for annual meetings or membership meetings must be sent certified mail, return receipt requested, must be signed by a witness, must include a deadline for return to the association, must be blue scented paper for authenticity. I like that last answer. Mail ballots returned to the association must be enough to meet regular quorum requirements, must remain sealed until the deadline for return, must be maintained as a record of the association, and must be destroyed after being counted. Steve's 6 o'clock rule. Oh, I'm very excited about this. It looks like 100% of the people have gotten that one right. Okay, just to give you the quick tally of these. Oh, I'm happy about this. All right, number 1, 95% got it right. Number 2, 97% got it right. Number 3, 94% got it right. Number 4, 85% got it right. Number 5, 95% got it right. Excellent. Like I mentioned to you in the beginning, I promised that you would know more than 80 or 90% of the HOA members out there. And now with the results of that pop quiz, I'm very confident that that's the case. All right, I got one note here from mine. Okay, yep, all right, well, that's all the time I've got. Listen, I really appreciate you all joining me. I hope that you learned a lot. If you have any specific questions and you want your manager to get a hold of me, you'll get with them. Thank you for your time, and appreciate you taking the afternoon.